Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to spend some time with me. And man, it's just a beautiful May day here in Southwest Missouri. It's probably 65 degrees, sunny, just everything's green, really nice out here. Guys, what I want to do in today's video, and what I've been trying to do here on the Advanced Bass Fishing channel, is I want to just have conversations with you guys, just like if we were here hanging out in the boat talking about bass fishing. And in today's video, I want to have sort of a wide-ranging discussion on just some general things that I have learned about in bass fishing that stand out to me that has really helped my success. Because in bass fishing, you have periods that you go through in terms of learning phases, and some of those learning phases are pretty profound, and others are smaller and just have more of a minor role. But I just want to talk about some things that I've learned in my 50 years of fishing, that if you incorporate it into your bass fishing strategy, I think it's going to really help out. Also, guys, for get started, just a couple of our daily housekeeping tips that keep the channels on YouTube here. Just want to invite everybody, if you haven't had a chance, to please bookmark and use my tackle warehouse link that I put in every video description. If you guys need tackle and you don't have any bias on how you order it, if you use that link I put in the description of the video, the channel gets a small percentage of a commission on anything that you buy. So that's a good way to help out, as well as using all the other links in the description. So I really appreciate that. Big thank you for me and my family if you're doing that. Okay, let's talk some stuff here, some things that have really stood out to me that's helped me in bass fishing over the course of the years. And this is a continuing learning experience. You're never ever going to learn anything, but there's some things that really stand out that have helped me a long time catch more fish than that I ever have before. So the first thing we'll talk about, guys, is when you talk about in terms of how fast or how slow to fish. One of the things that you have to realize, it's not about fishing fast or slow or a specific speed or pace, but it's finding out that what is the best pace for the condition and the day and the technique that you're fishing. You have to find the right pace instead of trying to figure out if you want to fish fast or slow. Now, the pace, as far as how fast you move your boat or how many casts you make to an area or how fast or slow you retrieve your lure, it has to do a lot with the environmental factors surrounding the lake and the mood and the personality of the fish in general. Now, most of the time, there are some things that sort of, that you can give you some guidelines on how to do that, but most of the time it's experimentation. You have to experiment and find out, how fast the fish want it or how slow they want the technique. So it's a matter of just experimentation until you get on the right, pace. In general, what you're going to find out is the colder the water and the more stained the water, the more slow that you have to fish. And on the opposite spectrum, the cleaner and the warmer the water, the faster that you can fish in terms of how fast you're reeling your bait in. Now, there's other factors that have, determining, that throw that a little bit, but that's the main gist with that. Now, another thing with that is the type of cover that you're fishing. One of the things about bass fishing is you have to be efficient, and you have to be able to fish the cover that you're fishing effectively without what I call slopping through it. So the type of cover that you're fishing a lot of times will dictate how fast that you can fish through that area. For example, I like to use extremes, and then you can sort of fill in the blanks in between. But if you're fishing an area that has a lot of open water in it, or maybe a straight stretch of long rocky bank, or a straight stretch of riprap, or anything that doesn't have specific targets like trees or laydowns or docks, you can generally fish a little bit faster, because by doing that, by making long casts in those open areas out there, you can really determine if there's many fish there or not. It's like if you go through an area and you fish at like a moderate pace and you don't catch anything, good indication, that you can keep moving through there without adjusting your pace. But say, for example, if you get on a long riprap stretch and you're throwing a crankbait and you start catching a few fish here and there, that is when you can dial it back and slow down and really make sure that you're hitting every 2 or 3 feet instead of every 10 feet when you're looking for them. On the other end of that is if you're fishing heavy cover, like lily pads or, boat docks or flooded grass or any type of thick cover, bushes, you have to slow down because you can't efficiently and effectively fish that thicker cover at a faster pace. So it's all relative to the amount of cover that you have. Now, in terms of a pace, you have two different elements with that. You have the pace that you're working your trolling motor, and you have the pace that you're working your lure on your rod and reel. A lot of times those are sort of tied hand in hand a little bit, because a lot of times if you're trying to cover water, say you're out on a big open grass flat and you've got a lipless crankbait on, you can fish that bait fast, and you can also run the trolling motor a little faster because you're just trying to cover water until you locate those fish to where you can slow down. But then again, if you're flipping a jig in flooded bushes, you have got to dial back your trolling motor, and you've got to dial back how fast you work that bait. One of the things that you will find in bass fishing is that the faster you fish, most of the time, the least amount of fish you're going to catch. If you can't really decide how fast that you need to be fishing, always err on the side of going too slow, especially if you're thoroughly working the cover. That is a super, super important thing, guys. You can't slop through an area, because let's say, for example, you're fishing a row of boat docks, and you go down through that boat dock and you throw a spinnerbait or a crankbait on down the front of the dock or down the edges of the dock, and then go to the next one and call it good. You're slopping through there unless that is where the fish are setting up, because a lot of times you may have to get back in behind that boat dock and skip a wacky rig underneath that walkway, or you may have to flip a jig at that part of that dock where the walkway actually intersects with the front part of the dock. And so, given the fact about how you fish that, how thoroughly you fish a dock, one person may say, well, man, I fished 20 docks today and didn't catch anything. And the other person will say, well, man, I fished 20 docks today and got bit on 10 of them. And a lot of it is it's how thorough they fish that piece of cover and how they, dial it back a little bit. So that's one aspect of it. Okay, another thing that I've learned in bass fishing a lot is the impact of fishing pressure on fish. Now, we all talk a lot about, the impact of weather patterns on bass and how that affects fish. But in my opinion, weather patterns are secondary to fishing pressure. Fishing pressure, to me, is probably the number one thing that negatively turns off a bass, without a doubt. And they've been conditioned to learn that. It's like they're educated to learn. It's like when they hear outboard motors on a lake, or they hear trolling motors, or they hear jet skis running around, they are evolving to get inactive during those conditions. Same way they'd get inactive if it started flooding out, the lake started flooding, or if you got a post front bluebird day. There's things that turn bass off to feeding, and fishing pressure is a big part of it. Now, if you fish a lake that's getting a lot of fishing pressure and you can't get away from it, there's a couple different things that you can do. First of all, try to get away from it. If you can locate a part of the lake that is not getting as much traffic, that's generally going to be a little bit better. Sometimes fishing during the week instead of the weekend is going to be better. But if you're forced to fish on a lake that gets a lot of fishing pressure, you're going to do a lot better by fishing bottom lures. Bottom bouncing lures like jigs, shaky head worms are going to catch a lot more fish than the moving type lures. When the fish get a lot of fishing pressure and a lot of noise and just a lot of traffic on the lake, they don't want to chase. They want to hunker down, and they want to stay on the bottom, and they want to stay by cover. So that's why your slower baits are going to work a little bit better. And that's also the reason why overall your slower baits are going to be the most consistent baits day in and day out, because a slow bait, hold on one second. Hey, Owen, I had some son there, had some chickens in my garage, just having him trying to get out of there. But anyway, you're going to find out overall that a slower bait is going to be your most consistent bass producer over your moving bait. So the people in general that fish baits like shaky heads and worms and football head jigs, they catch fish day in and day out, on sunny days, on cloudy days, on any type of day, versus somebody that fishes like a spinnerbait or a crankbait. That's why you take somebody like, take Larry Nixon, for example. If you don't know who Larry Nixon is, you don't know much about bass fishing. But anyway, Larry Nixon is a prime example. He is a worm fisherman, and he's been able to maintain some of the most consistent tournament performances over decades and decades and decades because he likes to drag a worm. He likes to throw a Cinco. He fishes bottom baits and he catches them day in and day out, where you have other anglers, say, for example, like Rick Clunn, that may not have the consistency as Larry Nixon, but he wins a lot of tournaments because he fishes those moving baits like spinner baits and crank baits for the aggressive fish. And when those things are working, he does really good, but they don't work as consistently as a bottom bait. So that's another, big thing to remember with it. Another thing, guys, is the one thing that stands out to me is getting skilled with the trolling motor. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of bass fishing that I have ever seen, is people that don't spend time mastering the art of being on a trolling motor. There's a lot to it. It's not as simple as getting up in front of your boat and turning your trolling motor on, because when you're running your boat, you have to determine what the best boat speed, boat position, boat angle is to put yourself in the position to make the best cast. And that's what boat positioning is all about. It's positioning yourself to make the best cast to generate the strike on the cover that you're fishing. So one of the things about boat positioning and trolling motor operation that you really need to learn about is first of all, you have to understand your boat. You have to understand how your boat stops and starts with your trolling motor, and that depends on the size of your boat. That's why I've used this Vexus 1980 aluminum, is that it stops and starts faster. But if you're in a big 21-foot fiberglass bass boat, it starts slow and it stops slow. So you have to get comfortable with knowing how to start and stop your boat, because if you come up to a piece of cover, like you're coming up to a lay down tree in the water, you don't want to get too close to that, and you don't want to get too far away from that piece of cover. You want to come in at the exact perfect speed and the exact perfect distance away from it to make your presentation. And if you are not good on a trolling motor, a lot of times you'll get too close to the piece of cover, or you'll get too close and you'll try to back up a little bit, and you throw prop wash into the area. There's always a dang plane or a train coming over, and I'm doing a video here every single time. So you have to make sure that you sort of position yourself on that trolling motor where you glide quietly into that piece of cover. And that's harder than what it looks like, because you have factors like wind and current and sunlight angle that determine how easy or how hard that is to do. If you have current coming down a lake, that's a variable. And if you have wind coming in a different direction, that's a variable. So spend a lot of time, with your trolling motor operation. And with that, in correlation with trolling motor operation, another thing, guys, that's going to help you out, and we talk about this a lot, is your casting skills. If you are good at running a trolling motor, and if you're good at casting, you've won the battle. It's like that's 75% of bass fishing right there. If you can put your bait where you want it, and you can put your boat where you want it, you're going to catch so many more fish than somebody that cannot cast accurately. Because I don't know how many times I've been fishing, guys, with, like on my on-the-water lessons, for example. A lot of the times on the on-the-water lessons I do, some of these anglers are getting started out, so they're not like really, really good casters. And we'll be in a situation where I know the fish are out, and I'll say, you need to cast right over there by that tree. You got to get right next to it. And they try as hard as they can. They cannot get the bait there. It's like they'll make a cast over there, and they need to be that far away from that tree, and they'll get 3 or 4 or 5 feet away from it. They simply can't make that cast, and therefore they're not going to catch the fish. So this is one thing everybody can get good at. It's like all you have to do is, if you've got a yard or go to a park or go to the lake, spend some time on your casting skills. Learn to pitch and flip accurately. Learn to cast sidearm. Learn to cast underhanded. Learn to cast overhanded. If you can put your bait where it needs to be, the success rate in bass fishing that you're going to have, your consistency levels will go through the roof. It's probably the most underrated aspect of bass fishing that there is. You can talk about, seasonal patterns and movements and using technology and having the right lure color and having the right bait and having the best rod and reel. But ultimately, guys, if you can't put your bait where that bait needs to be, you're not going to catch many fish. I mean, they're going to have to be super aggressive to come out and get it, because let's say, for example, you got this lay down log in the water and there's a bass on it. And in order to generate the strike from that bass, you've got to come past that log at the right angle, at the right speed, and the right distance away from that. And even if you miss it by a couple inches, that makes all the difference in the world between you getting strikes or not. And I learned this from fishing down at Grand Lake on boat docks a lot, because one of my favorite ways to catch them on Grand Lake is like to throw a crankbait or a swim jig next to a boat dock. And I have found out in my fishing, if I get that bait, if this bait lands any farther away from this far away from the edge of the boat dock, I'm not going to catch any fish. If it lands that far away, I'm not going to catch one. If it lands that far away, I'm going to catch one. So never underestimate the importance of that. It makes a really big difference in that. Okay, the next one, we could go on. I could talk about this all day, guys, but I don't want to hold you up all day. One final thing that I want to talk about is you have got to use your own creativity and your imagination and your experience. One of the things that I found out about bass fishing, now the neighbor started up his dang mower. One of the things I found out about bass fishing is you hear people talking about the best color all the time, of crankbait or whatever. It's more important to come up with something that the bass have never seen before. So when you're talking about using your imagination and creativity, that goes into a lot of different areas of fishing. It goes into using colors or profiles or types of baits that most people would never think about. Example would be if you're in muddy water, most people want a bright colored lure in muddy water. And say, for example, you want to try a translucent color, like a real natural looking color that most people would never try, go ahead and try it. You never know what the bass want. They may want that. Never underestimate your own unique individual creativity and imagination as an angler. Experiment with it. That's the main thing with it. And I have found out, like I said, more than anything else, that the bass prefer something that they've never seen before. Now, that can be a lure, it can be an angle, it can be the way you approach a fishing spot. For example, if you're coming up on a main lake point, 99.9% of the anglers, they'll get out like in 20 foot of water and cast to the point. Instead of doing that, get up on the point and cast out to deep water. Just always experiment and try something new and something different, because that's how innovations are made. And that's how you generate strikes from heavily pressured bass, is trying stuff that they've never seen before. But anyway, guys, that's just some random thoughts here. Just wanted to share that. This, like I said, we could talk all day about that, but that's just a few things that stand out in my mind that'll really help you out if you incorporate that in your fishing. So anyway, I hope it helps you guys. We'll talk later.